The courtroom was so silent that every breath seemed borrowed. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder against the marble walls, and the nation froze. Reporters scribbled furiously, while cameras clicked like mechanical heartbeats. Emily Parker whispered, "This cannot be the end," her voice cracking, though her gaze remained unbroken. Daniel Ross leaned forward, his jaw tight, hands clenched against the polished oak table. Olivia Reed said softly, "Justice is never simple." Outside, storm clouds pressed heavy against the courthouse dome, shadows dripping across the grand steps. Marcus Hale stood like stone, calm yet unreadable, as though holding secrets too dangerous to reveal. Catherine Ward adjusted her flawless coat, her poise untouched even by the shock. A phone vibrated on the bench, cutting through the stillness, and the survivor flinched as if struck. The haunting thought of Lily Harper flickered in every mind, a memory unfinished. The verdict was delivered, but the truth had only begun to unravel. Emily walked alone through the courthouse corridor, each step heavy, echoing like a drumbeat of unfinished truth. Daniel said, "You should not face this storm alone," his voice tight, caught between anger and loyalty. She did not look back. Olivia's voice carried softly down the hall. "The fight is only just beginning." The survivor's gaze met the marble floor, as though answers were hidden in the cracks. Marcus stood at the far end, silent, his shadow stretched long by the fading light. Catherine moved past reporters with elegance, her heels clicking in sharp rhythm, her silence cutting deeper than words. The memory of Lily hummed like a faint song, invisible yet undeniable, reminding them all that the case was not only about justice, but about a wound that refused to close. Rain tapped against the tall courthouse windows as Olivia guided Emily toward a quiet corner. "You need rest," Olivia whispered, her warmth steady, though shadows veiled her thoughts. Emily shook her head, her breath short, and muttered, "Rest doesn't change the truth." Daniel leaned on the cold railing nearby, restless, the storm outside mirroring his agitation. Marcus watched silently, his stillness unnerving, as though calculating each step in a silent game. Catherine appeared at the entrance, her presence commanding without a word. The atmosphere felt fragile, like glass about to fracture. Every glance heavy with suspicion, every silence filled with unspoken fears. The storm outside roared louder, shaking the old windows. Emily whispered, "Why does it feel like someone already decided our fate?" Daniel slammed his hand against the wall, his frustration raw. "Oh!" Olivia placed a calming hand on Emily's arm, her soothing tone carrying strength. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Not all truths are meant to see daylight." Catherine stood nearby, her lips curling into the faintest smile, her silence weighing heavier than thunder. In the distance, the faint memory of Lily's laughter lingered like a ghost carried by the wind, chilling them to the bone. Lightning flashed across the windows, illuminating faces carved with fear and determination. Emily said, "This case will not break me." Daniel muttered, "Then it will break us all." Olivia's steady tone cut through the storm. "Strength lies in unity." Marcus glanced toward the storm, his eyes unreadable, as though he already knew what was to come. Catherine's silence carried the weight of secrets long buried. The whisper of Lily's memory echoed again, more insistent now, like a reminder that the case was more than law. It was blood, trust, and betrayal. The city woke under a slate sky as Emily returned to the Riverside Memorial she never missed. She traced the carved names, her breath tight, and whispered, "I am still here." Daniel said, "You do not owe this place your pain." She shook her head. Olivia arrived with quiet steps and offered coffee she knew would go unfinished. Olivia said, "Grief is not a debt, it is a compass." Emily studied the water where lights shimmered like broken truths. Marcus watched from the path, steady, keeping distance as if guarding a border. Catherine stood across the street, a silhouette behind tinted glass, patient as winter. Emily pressed a sealed letter to her chest and did not open it. Daniel said, "One day you should read it." Emily answered, "Not today." The river moved like time, relentless, refusing bargains. Somewhere a bell tolled, and the case felt larger than the city itself. They found a bench beneath an elm where the city hummed softly. Olivia said, "Tell me what you fear most." Emily answered, "That truth will choose someone else." Daniel paced, restless eyes on the courthouse spire beyond the trees. Marcus approached with measured steps and set a file beside Emily. Marcus said. A lead surfaced, then vanished. Olivia's warmth steadied the tremor that followed. Catherine crossed the park path, polite smile carved like marble, and said, "Careful with rumors." Emily folded her hands until the knuckles blanched. Daniel said, "We follow it anyway." The wind lifted stray papers like birds that forgot how to land. Emily breathed in, and the resolve tasted like rain. Somewhere a siren wailed, thin and far, as if warning them of the next turn. A sketchbook thumped onto the table of a small diner off Main. Aidan Cole said, "You missed something," eyes bright with defiance and fear. Emily studied the rough lines of alley cameras and timestamps. Daniel said, "Where did you get this?" Aidan answered, "Where everyone looks but no one sees." Olivia's voice softened. "You are safe here." The neon sign buzzed, a nervous metronome above their heads. Marcus stood near the door, scanning reflections in the glass. Catherine stepped in with a courteous nod and said, "Careful, hearsay spoils appetite." Aidan rolled a pencil between fingers that did not stop moving. Emily said, "Show me the path." Outside, rain began to stipple the window like urgent code. The diner felt smaller as the truth pressed inward. They traced the route behind the courthouse where delivery trucks sighed. Aidan pointed to a service camera with a stuttering red light. Aidan said, "It blinks when someone ghosts the feed." Daniel muttered, "Then someone ghosted it often." Emily felt the air thin with the pattern forming. Olivia said, "If the feed breaks, a backup speaks." Marcus produced a small drive, eyes steady, and said, "I kept a copy." Catherine appeared at the far end of the alley, steps measured, umbrella perfect against the drizzle. She said, "Unauthorized copies are messy." Emily stared at the lens and imagined Lily walking past it once, unseen. The thought tightened her spine. Daniel said, "We test the copy tonight." The alley smelled of wet cardboard and metal, like old secrets refusing to rust. Night settled like ink as they gathered in a cramped office above a shuttered shop. The backup played, glitching, then sharpening into silhouettes they knew too well. Emily whispered, "There." Daniel froze, breath caught on a hook of recognition. Olivia said, "This changes the ground we stand on." Aidan tapped the desk, counting frames as if timing a heartbeat. Marcus remained composed, but his eyes gave away the storm beneath. Catherine's voice came through the open door, smooth and unhurried, "Be careful what you confirm." Emily stood, taller than her fear, and said, "We confirm everything." The room felt electrified, a storm without rain, and somewhere the sealed letter waited for dawn. The nation did not know it yet, but the case had shifted. The courthouse basement smelled of damp stone and dust, as Emily slid a key into a forgotten archive room. Daniel muttered, "We should not be here without clearance." Emily replied, "Clearance won't save us." Olivia placed a careful hand on Emily's shoulder, whispering, "Every file has a voice if you listen closely." Aidan crouched beside a locked cabinet, tools in restless hands. Marcus stood watch at the door, his eyes sharp, his silence heavier than the air. Catherine's footsteps echoed above them, deliberate and steady, as though she already knew their trespass. Emily pulled a folder marked with Lily's name, her hand trembling. Daniel said, "If this is real, it was buried on purpose." Olivia added, "Then it will scream when unearthed." The hum of the old lights flickered like nervous truth, and the room seemed smaller with every breath. The folder revealed transcripts that made Emily's pulse quicken. She whispered, "This is testimony they erased." Daniel's face tightened as he scanned the lines, muttering, "They wanted her voice silenced." Olivia said, "Erased voices returned sharper than before." Aidan's eyes darted between the papers, sketching quick notes like sparks on the page. Marcus shifted uneasily, his calm mask slipping for just a breath. Catherine descended the stairs, her heels clicking with elegant rhythm. She said, "Curiosity can be dangerous when it draws blood." Emily closed the folder firmly and said, "Then let it bleed." The tension thickened like smoke, and the walls themselves seemed to lean closer to listen. Rain hammered the courthouse roof as they gathered in an unused jury chamber. Emily spread the papers across the table. Daniel said, "This connects her to the night she vanished." Olivia answered, "It also connects those who swore they were not there." Aidan leaned forward, restless, saying, "Someone moved cameras to erase this path." Marcus said nothing, but his silence felt carved with intent. Catherine leaned in, her perfume sharp, saying, "Speculation destroys faster than proof." Emily locked eyes with her and whispered, "Proof has a way of surviving storms." The thunder outside roared as if agreeing. They followed the trail to an underground garage where evidence vans were kept. Emily's voice shook but remained steady. "If we find what they hid, we bring her back," Daniel said. "And if we do not, we are finished." Aidan darted ahead, pointing at fresh tire marks that gleamed under neon light. Olivia said, "Every mark leaves a witness." Marcus surveyed the shadows, his jaw tightening. Catherine appeared from behind a van, her coat pristine even in the grime. She said, "Some doors should remain closed." Emily stepped closer and replied, "Not when ghosts knock." The garage hummed with engines cooling, and the air reeked of gasoline and secrets. The chamber upstairs buzzed with tension as Emily placed a photograph on the table, Lily smiling on the courthouse steps days before her disappearance. Daniel whispered, "She was already marked." Olivia said, "And yet she still shone." Aidan added, "This proves someone watched her closely." Marcus shifted again, his stillness heavy with unspoken weight. Catherine's smile was thin as paper when she said, "Memories mislead more than they reveal." Emily pressed the photo down and said, "Not this one." The room held its breath as though Lily herself had entered. A storm of silence cracked wider than thunder. The archive prints were still warm when Aidan shut the door and locked the latch. He said, "I knew her from before anyone did." Emily steadied her breath and asked, "From where?" He traced a logo on the file, a charity crest that belonged to Catherine. Daniel said, "You left that out." Aidan swallowed hard and answered, "I was told to keep quiet if I wanted a roof." Olivia's voice softened. Silence can be survival. Emily felt the floor tilt as the timeline rewrote itself in her mind. Marcus watched the corners of the room as if the walls could listen. Catherine's name hovered like a knife that would not fall. Emily said, "Then you are a witness we never had." The truth shifted, and the storm inside them found a new center. They laid timelines across the table like fault lines waiting to break. Emily said, "The outage matches the night the vans moved." Daniel tapped the minute marks and murmured, "Someone edited the mirror feed." Olivia whispered, "That takes access." Aidan kept counting frames, lips moving in quick prayer. Marcus stayed quiet, but a flicker crossed his eyes at the word access. Emily felt the betrayal rise before the proof arrived. She said someone close helped to bury her path. Daniel's jaw hardened as if bracing for impact. Silence pressed on them until the lights hummed like nerves. The room tasted of dust and doubt and fear. Olivia set a small recorder on the table and pressed play. Her voice from months ago filled the air like a ghost. She said on tape, "Keep your answers short and clean." Daniel stared at her, shock tightening every line of his face. Olivia said now, "I guided them to survive the glare." Emily's heart pounded as she heard how a witness had been shaped. Aidan asked, "Was that for truth or for optics?" Olivia's eyes shone, tender and unflinching, as she answered, "Both, because the system devours the uncoached." Marcus shifted, and the chair creaked like a warning. Emily whispered, "You bent the light until it lied." The room felt colder, and the recorder kept blinking like a heartbeat that would not stop. Aidan spread sketches of alley angles and gala flyers across the floor. He said, The outages line up with Catherine's charity events. Daniel exhaled as if the air had weight. Emily traced Lily's last known route, each block a bruise on the map. Olivia whispered, patterns are the language of control. Aidan added, she walked past 3 blind spots in a row. Marcus stared at the door, listening for footsteps that might end this moment. Emily said, someone choreographed the dark. The word dark hung like a curtain ready to drop. Outside, sirens braided through the night like iron threads. The pattern clicked, and the room tightened around the truth. Catherine arrived without hurry, carrying the silence like a signature. She said, you have been busy. Emily stood, her voice level. We found your shadows. Catherine smiled with a practiced grace that never reached her eyes. Daniel said, blind spots do not happen by accident. Catherine answered, influence arranges light as it pleases. Olivia held her ground, calm at the edge of a storm. Aidan flinched, then steadied, as if choosing a side in real time. Marcus watched Catherine as if measuring distance for a final step. Emily said, the nation will hear every step she took. Catherine's gaze did not flicker. Power had finally stepped into the light. The courtroom brimmed with silence as Catherine took the stand, her composure perfect, her eyes steady as glass. Emily whispered, this is where truth bleeds or hides. Daniel said, do not let her own the room. Olivia leaned forward, calm yet unshaken, her voice anchoring Emily's trembling heart. Aidan shuffled restless papers, his sketches ready to expose the blind spots. Marcus sat close to the aisle, his silence heavy, unreadable, a shadow within the trial. Catherine spoke with poise. I served with honor, I guided with light. Emily said, you also chose who walked in darkness. The judge's gavel struck once, silencing the murmurs, and the nation leaned closer through screens and radios. The air felt charged, ready to shatter. Emily rose, her voice steady despite the quake in her chest. She said, did you authorize the blind spots? Catherine smiled faintly and replied, blind spots are accidents of human design. Daniel slammed his palm on the table, saying, but your name is written in them. Olivia whispered, stay grounded, Emily. Aidan lifted his sketchbook, revealing marked alleys tied to Catherine's events. The jury leaned in, breaths held like fragile glass. Catherine's gaze cut across the room, sharp as ice, and she said, influence bends perception, but perception is not crime. Emily replied, it is when it buries the missing. The silence was louder than thunder. The tension cracked as Catherine's voice lowered. She said, you cannot prove who moved the shadows. Emily leaned closer and answered, but we can show who benefited. Daniel slid a folder across the table, pages spilling with financial traces. Olivia said, influence leaves, fingerprints as loud as blood. Aidan tapped the sketch with a trembling finger, whispering, it all circles back here. Marcus shifted in his chair, his jaw tight as though the words struck him personally. Catherine's face remained serene, but her eyes flared with steel. Emily's final words cut the air. Lily's absence was no accident. The jury exhaled as one, as if they too had carried the weight. The gallery gasped as Daniel stood and said, you architected this, Marcus. Silence fell heavy as stone. Emily turned, eyes wide with betrayal she had long feared. Marcus exhaled slowly, his voice even. I did what I thought was necessary. Olivia whispered, for whom? Aidan froze, his pencil slipping from his fingers. Catherine's lips curved in a silent victory. Emily's voice broke, but stayed firm. You carried us through storms, yet you built them too. Marcus lowered his gaze, the mask cracked. The courtroom air burned with betrayal. The gavel struck again, and the trial became war. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside as Catherine rose from the stand. She said, this circus feeds the nation's hunger, but justice is not a feast. Emily answered, justice is not yours to define. Daniel's voice shook with anger. You thrived while others vanished. Olivia said softly, truth waits, even if buried deep. Aidan whispered, She walked past the blind spots we mapped and never returned. Marcus closed his eyes, silence heavy, guilt painted on his face. Catherine's calm never broke, but her words cut like razors. You will never find peace in truth. Emily lifted Lily's photograph, her voice strong, but we will find her. The room shattered into gasps, the climax breaking through like lightning. The verdict rang through the chamber like a hammer cracking stone. The judge declared guilt on one charge, innocence on another, leaving the nation divided in a single breath. Emily whispered, "Justice tastes hollow when split." Daniel slammed his fist softly on the bench, muttering, "Half a truth is still a lie." Olivia said, "Yet it is still written into history." Aidan buried his face in his hands, whispering, "She deserved more than fractions." Marcus stared forward, his expression unreadable, shadows carving lines across his face. Catherine held her head high, her calm unbroken, as though she had already rehearsed this outcome. Emily felt the weight of Lily's absence heavier than any gavel. The silence that followed was the loudest sound the courtroom had ever held. Outside, the courthouse steps swarmed with cameras flashing like lightning. Reporters shouted questions into the storm of microphones. Emily said, "Truth does not fit into sound bites." Daniel muttered, "They want blood, not justice." Olivia guided Emily gently down the stairs, whispering, "Stand tall even when the ground shakes." Aidan clutched his sketchbook against his chest, his voice small. She would have hated this noise. Marcus stood slightly apart, his eyes on the horizon rather than the crowd. Catherine emerged behind them, lifting her chin as though the storm were applause. The air smelled of rain and tension, heavy enough to drown them. That night, Emily sat at her small kitchen table, the sealed letter trembling in her hands. She said aloud, "I am not ready." Daniel stood nearby, his face lit by a single lamp, saying, "Some truths destroy before they heal." Olivia's voice was gentle, but unopened wounds fester. Aidan perched restlessly by the window, whispering, "She would want you to read it." Marcus leaned against the doorway, his silence thicker than any words. Catherine's absence was louder than her presence had ever been, her shadow etched into the memory of the trial. Emily pressed the letter flat against the table, but still she did not break the seal. The ticking clock made each second feel like judgment. The next morning, Emily stood by the memorial river again. She said, "Verdicts cannot bind memory." Daniel stood beside her, shoulders heavy, saying, "But they bind futures." Olivia's voice carried in the crisp air, "Justice is not final, only paused." Aidan knelt by the carved names, sketching Lily's smile with shaky lines. Marcus lingered farther back, his eyes clouded with guilt. Catherine's car passed slowly across the street, her tinted windows reflecting the river without revealing her face. Emily closed her eyes, whispering, "We carry her until she is whole again." The river rippled as if in answer, silver against the morning sun. Back inside the courthouse, empty now, Emily placed Lily's photo on the bench where it had begun. She whispered, "We end where she started." Daniel said, "The system may never confess, but we will not forget." Olivia stood at her side, her calm presence unshaken, saying, "Memory can be louder than verdicts." Aidan touched the frame gently and whispered, "She still belongs to us." Marcus remained in the shadows, his face lined with quiet ruin. Catherine's name echoed through the marble, even though her heels no longer struck the floor. Emily closed her eyes, and the silence carried the weight of every secret exposed and every justice denied. Night pooled in the courthouse rotunda, as Emily faced Catherine beneath the dome. Catherine said, "You mistook grief for proof." Emily answered, "I learned that power edits memory." Daniel stood close, his voice low, "The edits end tonight." Olivia's gaze held steady warmth that did not yield. Aidan clutched his sketchbook, whispering, "The blind spots draw a map point." Marcus stepped from the shadow, shoulders squared, and said, "I opened the door they used." The confession cracked the air like ice. Emily lifted Lily's photo and said, "She will not be footnote." Catherine's smile thinned, practiced grace slipping at the edges. The rotunda carried every word upward, as if the building itself wanted to remember. They moved to a quiet antechamber where the air smelled of dust and old rulings. Catherine said, "You cannot exhume what the system buried." Emily replied, "Then we become the shovel." Daniel spread new prints that linked the gala lights to the outages. Olivia said, "Patterns testify when people will not." Aidan traced lines with a trembling finger, saying, "The route never changed." Marcus faced Catherine and said, "I cleared the way, but I did not carry her." Silence settled like ash, thick and gray. Emily's breath steadied as the picture locked into place. The antechamber seemed to tilt, as if the foundation had shifted at last. A bell tolled midnight as Catherine's poise hardened into steel. She said, "You will drown chasing ghosts." Emily answered, "Ghosts float when truth is heavier." Daniel said, "Step back from this before it breaks you." Olivia's voice did not tremble. "Confession is mercy you can still choose." Aidan whispered she would want the words said out loud. Marcus took a single pace toward the door and said, "I will testify to what I did." Catherine's eyes flashed, cold as winter glass. Emily held the photo at her heart and said, "We speak for who cannot." The bell faded, leaving a hush that felt like the moment before rain. Dawn broke thin and gray over the river as they returned to the memorial. Emily said, "Verdicts fade, but names stay." Daniel set the files down like offerings. Olivia murmured, "Memory is the court that never adjourns." Aidan sketched Lily's smile slower this time, steady hands at last. Marcus stood apart with eyes lowered, saying, "I will put my name on the record." Catherine watched from the walkway, a statue carved from doubt. Wind lifted the pages, and the river answered in silver ripples. Emily touched the stone and said, "We will carry her forward, not back." The city seemed to hold its breath for the next word. Courthouse hallway emptied to a hush that felt like snow. Emily stood alone before the sealed letter and finally broke the wax. She read in silence while the building waited. Daniel said, "Do you want us here?" She nodded without speaking. Olivia touched her shoulder, steady and warm. Aidan's voice was barely air. "What does it say?" Marcus did not move. Emily looked up, eyes clear as winter light, and said, "Lily wrote one line." She folded the page and whispered it for all of them. "Find the truth, then let it find you." The words hung, and the nation kept listening.